And now in this very last transformations video, we get to put it all together. So we're going to start with describe how the graph of the function can be obtained from one of the basic graphs, then graph the function. So first off, which is our basic function? Well, this is our y equals the square root of x graph. And again, let's just write out that table of values. And we get 0, 1, 4, 9, which gives us 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's graph that basic transfer, or that basic graph. 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, 9, 3. Now, what are we going to do to it? Well, we can look at it, and what I like to do is I like to go left to right. So I'm going to start with this negative. So this is going to reflect the y values. Now that's me. The textbook just says reflect over the x-axis, but I always like to start with the fact that I'm reflecting the y values over the x-axis. In other words, I'm going to take the y values and I'm going to multiply them by -1. Then I've got this 2. The 2 is going to be a vertical stretch by 2, which is going to make me take my y values and multiply them by 2. Then I'm going to move over here and I've got this +1. And this is going to make me do a vertical translation or a vertical shift up 1, which is going to make me take my y values and add 1. So crazy, I made a question where the only thing we're transforming is y. Usually we transform more than one thing. I don't know what I was thinking when I made these, but it's kind of funky. And so because it's a transformation on y, we know that all of our x values are actually going to stay the same. 0, 1, 4, and 9. And really, it's our y values that are going to change. They're going to get multiplied by -1 and by 2, and then they're going to get 1 added to them. So literally what you can do is you can just take this and you can multiply it by -2, and then you can add 1. So when you're doing the transformation, it's kind of like the transforming of points. Really what we're going to do is multiply every y value by -2, and then we're going to add 1. Now, we would do that if we were just transforming points, but we have this table of values, so let's just double check that that's right. So the equation is y equals -2 times the square root of x plus 1. If we plug in 0, we get -2 times the square root of 0 plus 1, which is going to take that y value. It's going to multiply it by -2, and it's going to add 1. So I get 1. The next point, I've got -2 times the square root of 1 plus 1. It's going to take, square root of 1 is 1 times -2, which is -2, and it's going to add 1 to get -1. Same as if I had done -2 plus 1 to get -1. Same thing here. I can either, now that I trust this, I can do this, or I can put it in the table of values and get the same thing. -4 plus 1 is -3. And then lastly, -6 plus 1 is -5. So I'm going to plot these points. I've got 0, 1. So it was stretched and reflected, but nothing happens when it's 0, so it was just moved up 1. Then I have a point at 1, -1. I have a point at 4, -3. And I have a point at 9, -5. What happened? Well, I can definitely see that it's been reflected. I can see that it's been stretched because it used to be a space of 1, now it's a space of 2. It used to be a space of 2, now it's a space of 1, 2, 3, 4 from where it started. So it's got that vertical stretch. And then I can also see that it's been moved up 1. Good job. All right, so now let's do some descriptions. I just threw quite a few in here just to practice. So for this one, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start with your graph of 1 over x, right? So even though there's that 2 over there, you can picture this as 2 times 1 over x to see that basic graph a little bit better. And now let's do our descriptions. What is the 2 going to go? So we always go left to right. This is going to be a vertical stretch. Now I'm going to start getting lazy. You could say vertical stretch by multiplying the y coordinates by 2, or you could just say vertical stretch by 2. That's great. When you kind of get near the end of the note and you've got the swing of things, you can start getting lazy. And then what do you notice about the -5? Well, it's not in the bracket with x, so this is going to be a vertical shift But you don't have to say vertical because we're going to say down. Down is implying that it's a vertical shift. Awesome. Try the next one. First things first, this is a graph of y equals x cubed. And then there's three things happening to this graph. But let's go left to right. The first thing I see is this negative. So this is going to be a reflection. So it's going to reflect the y values over x-axis. And again, up to you whether you want to put it's up the y values. And then the 2 is going to be a vertical stretch. By 2. This minus 3 is in the bracket with x, so it's a transformation on x. It's going to be a shift, and where's it going to go? Opposite. Shift right 3. All right, 2 more to go. What's this? Well, we're going to start with our base graph of 1 over x. And then let's look at this one first. So this plus 3 is in the bracket with the x, so it's going to be a shift where? Left. And then this guy is outside the bracket of x, so it's going to be a shift up 2. This one, base graph is y equals the absolute value of x. And again, we're going to go left to right, so we're going to deal with this negative first. This negative is in the bracket with the x, so it's a reflection of which values? X. And when you reflect the x values, they go over the y-axis. And then we've got this 3, which is a transformation on x, so it's going to be opposite. So it looks like you're going to multiply by 3, so we're actually going to divide by 3. So we're going to call this a horizontal shrink. Now, the textbook would just say by 3, and you'd have to know that because it's shrinking, you're dividing by 3. If you put shrink by 1/3, I feel like that's okay too, right? So all I'm going to be looking for is that word shrink, and that when you actually do it, it means that the x values are going to be divided by 3, or the x values are going to be multiplied by 1/3. I do not, like the wording, it's always been a bit of a for me, but as long as you get that word shrink in there, and then your action is to divide by 3 or to multiply by 1/3. All right, let's practice writing a few equations with the given transformations. So the shape of y equals the square root of x. Now, we're going to reflect it across the y-axis. To go across the y-axis, this has to be the x values. And then we're going to shift it left. So we're going to add 5 to the x. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, both of these are transformations on x, so they're going to go under the bracket with the x. And then what it's going to be is that you're going to put a negative, and then you're going to put an x minus 5. So some people are like, well, couldn't we then write it as the square root of 5 minus x? And I'm like, yeah, sure, if you want to. Now this one, you know, maybe you're feeling a bit like, are you sure, Karen? So you can always check it. Let's go to Desmos. So we've got y equals the square root of x. Okay, and then let's make it reflect over the, let's just make sure I read that one right. I always have this fear that I've said it. Good, it was y-axis. So let's make it reflect over the y-axis. So we're going to go y equals square root of negative x. Okay, so that's a reflection over the y-axis. And now we also, having a short-term memory loss today, we've reflected it over the y-axis, and now we want to shift it left 5. So to shift it left 5, we go in here and we go minus 5. Oops, sorry, plus 5. That is what I wrote, wasn't it? All of a sudden I'm having this fear I'm doing everything wrong. Haha, see, it's a good thing we checked this one. I was being crazy. I wrote plus 5 and then I did plus 5. What was I thinking? And so, good thing I checked that one. Sometimes when you're making videos, you're just so on the spot. And when I just get this like niggling doubt in my brain that I'm like, am I doing the right thing? This feels wrong. So I'm glad I checked that one. So I wrote plus 5 and then I put a minus 5 in here. Be careful. Okay, so let's go back and check this. So then all of a sudden we have negative x plus 5. And that gives me that graph that's been reflected over the y-axis and then moved left 5. Whew. All right, next one. We've got y equals x squared. We want to stretch it horizontally by a factor of 2. What's that going to look like? Well, to stretch it, it should look like a half, right? Opposite as it appears. So to do that, we're going to put the 1/2 in the bracket with the x, and then we want it to go down 3. So we're going to keep that 1/2 x, and we're going to go down 3. And maybe the textbook writes it as x divided by 2, right? Something like that. Either one of these two would be absolutely fine. And again, if you want to check it, this one, do I need to check? Stretched horizontally, a half, and then of 2, and then shifted down 3. No, I'm positive about that one. All right, pause the video, try this last one. So we want to stretch it vertically by a factor of 3, and we want to reflect it across the x-axis. So both of those are for the y values. So to vertically stretch, you're going to times the y values by 3, and to reflect over the x-axis, you're going to multiply the y values by -1. So what I'm going to do is just put a -3 out front, and then I could rewrite this as -3 over x if I like. Okay, and again, if you're unsure, feel free to pop it in Desmos and see if you got the right answer. Then let's try points. So we've got the point -4, 6. What are we going to do to it? Well, this is going to multiply the y values by 3, or stretch it vertically, and then this is going to move it down 4. Now here's the important thing, is that when you start multiplying and adding, you always do left to right. So do the multiplication first, and then do the addition or subtraction. So we're going to multiply by 3 to get a new point, -4, 18. And then we're going to subtract 4 to get a new point, -4, 14. Great. What about this one? So again, we're starting with this point, -4, 6. What are we going to do to it? Well, this is going to take our x values and divide by 2, or multiply by a half. And then this is going to take our x values and add 1. So we can divide by 2 first to get -2, 6. And then we're going to add 1 to get a point, -1, 6. Okay, going down. Whew, getting harder. Okay, so we've got our point. I've already forgotten what our point is, -4, 6. We've got our point, -4, 6. And what are we going to do? Well, let's go left to right. The first thing we're going to do, now I always kind of do these at the same time. So the first thing we're going to do is multiply our y value by -1/2. And what that's going to do is reflect the y values over the x-axis, and it's going to horizontal or vertically shrink by a half at the same time. So if I multiply my y values by -1/2, and then I also, at that same time, am going to do any of my b values. So I always do a and b together because they affect x and y separately, and then I do c and d together. So I'm also going to take my x values and I'm going to multiply by -1. So I'm going to get a new point, 4, -3. Now, if you want to, you could totally just do like multiply the y value by -1, multiply the y value by a half, multiply the x value by -1. Like you can do them all at once, but I will say you can always do a and b together and then c and d together. So then we're going to move on to the next thing. The third thing you're going to do is take your y value and add 5. Add 5. So my new point would be 4, 2. And hopefully I'm not making any silly mistakes. Now I'm kind of scared. No, I think I'm okay. All right, why don't you pause the video and give this one a go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my y values and multiply them by 3. Second thing I'm going to do is take my x values and multiply them by 2. Remember, opposite as it appears. So this is going to be a horizontal stretch. Then I'm going to actually do that. So I get -8 and 18. Then I'm going to move on to the third transformation, which is going to be to take my x values and subtract 3. And then lastly, I'm going to take my y values and I'm going to add 1. So my new point would be -11, 19. right? And again, feel free to do these one at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4. But I always do 1 and 2 together, 3 and 4 together, just to save myself just a wee bit of time. Because now we get to transform base functions. Yay! So how many points do I need? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So my points are -3, 0, -2, 2, 0, 0, 2, 2, 3, 0. What am I going to do to these points? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is take my y value and multiply it by 2. Then there is no b value, so that's it. So I'm going to take my y value and multiply them all by 2. That is going to give me a new point, and it's going to be -3, 0, -2, 4, 0, 0, 2, 4, and 3, 0. And some people even like to graph this in stages. So when I first learned how to do this, I would always do like the visualization. So I would stretch it by 2 and make sure none of my points were off. And then I would just physically move it left, right, up, down. The only problem is that you end up with like a lot of points on your grid, and it does get confusing after a while. So I've come to this place where I actually just kind of like transforming the points and then putting them on the grid. So now what am I going to do? Well, this is going to shift it right 2, and then this is going to shift it down 1. So I'm going to go right 2, down 1, right 2, down 1. And I'm going to get a new point. So -3 plus 2 is -1. 0 minus 1 is -1. -2 plus 2 is 0. 4 minus 1 is 3. So 0 plus 2 is 2. 0 minus 1 is -1. I'll stop talking. All right, so now that you've got all those points, you can put them on the grid. So we've got a point at -1, -1. We've got a point at 0, 3, 2, -1, 4, 3, and then 5, -1. So then we are just going to connect our dots. And again, sometimes I do them 2 at a time, sometimes I do them all, kind of depending upon how I feel. And then you just want to double check again that things are the way it should be. So is it twice as tall as it should be? So it's supposed to be 2 high, or 4, it was 2 high, now it's 4 high. Is it moved to the right 2 and down 1? Yes. And again, if you want to throw in that intermediate little, like just the expansion and then moved it right and down, it makes the visualization of the transformations way easier. All right, let's move on to the last one. So the last one, how many transformations do we see here? Well, let's start with our transformation on y. Let's start with a. So we've got this -1 out here. So the first thing we're going to do is multiply our y values by -1. That's going to reflect our y values over the x-axis. And again, if you want to, you could just take your points, reflect them, and then move on. We're going to do them all at once. The second thing we can see is that there's a b value here. It's in the bracket with x. Anything in the bracket with x is opposite as it appears. So it looks like multiply by 1/2, but it's actually divide by 1/2, or you're going to multiply your x values by 2. So it's going to be a horizontal stretch by 2. And then lastly, we're going to move into here. And this is going to do my x values. It looks like +2, so it's going to be -2. This is going to be moving my graph left 2. So now let's pull off our key points. We've got one key point here at -3, 1. We've got another key point here at -1, 1. Then we increase and we stop here at 1, 3. And then the graph starts decreasing. Now along here you can pick whatever you want. I tend to pick the x-intercept if there is one, so I'm going to pick 4, 0. If you wanted to, you could pick a couple points along here. It's totally up to you. So there's this point here at 3, 1. There's a point at 4, 0. There's a point at 5, -1, and so on and so forth. Then the first thing we're going to do is this reflection of the y values over the x-axis. So we're going to multiply our y values by -1. At the same time, we can do our B transformation, which is that we're going to multiply our x values by 2. So we're going to do both of these at the same time, and then we'll do our addition subtractions. So our next new point is going to be at -6, -1. Then we're going to have a point at -2, -1. Then we're going to have a point at 2, -3. And then we're going to have a point at 8, 0 still. All right, so now we're going to do our horizontal translation. So it's going to go left 2. So to all the x values, we're going to just -2. Our final point will be at -8, -1. And again, sometimes I put the points as I go, and sometimes I do it at the end. Then I'm going to have a point at -4, -1, -4, -1, and then I connect it. And I can be looking right now, right? Like this is this piece. It's been reflected over the x-axis. It's been horizontally stretched by 2, so instead of being 2 segments long, it's now 4 segments long, and it's been moved left 2, right? Then we've got this point, which is going to be at 0, -3, 0, -3. So you can see that reflection, right? So now it's opening down, or I guess opening up instead of opening down. And then my last point is going to be at 6, 0. So I'm going to have a point here, and that's going to be the tail. And make sure that if your graph has an arrow on it, that your transformed graph has that arrow on it as well. It doesn't just end at that last point you take. You have to look to see what the graph is doing. Awesome, and that's it.